Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on the role of young people in transitional justice. My name is Marr Nyang, and I work as the founder and executive director of Gambia Participates, an organization in the Gambia that works towards, but not limited to, strengthening democracy and promoting inclusive transitional justice. Right now, I am a fellow under the Hurford Youth Fellowship with the World Movement for Democracy at the National Endowment for Democracy, NED. And my fellowship is focusing on promoting transitional justice in emerging democratic countries, and as well activating conversation with youth in non-democratic states around the world to advocate for democracy, sharing the Gambia experience in other countries. So what we know about transitional justice is that it firstly emerged in the 1980s and in the 1990s from Eastern Europe and Latin America, when victims of war and autocracy claimed for accountability, justice, and redress after a political shift in these areas. Since then, transitional justice has become a systematic political process where new governments established independent commission of inquiry to investigate past human rights violations and corruption, and as well establishing mechanisms for accountability, redress for victims, and most importantly, strengthening democratic institutions to avoid the recurrence of what has happened before. Today, I am glad that I'm joined with Anita Mitic from Serbia, the Balkans, Jigan Johnson from South Africa, and Dismas Nkunda from Burundi to discuss on the role of young people in transitional justice. The three are experts in this topic, and we look forward to be hearing more from them. I will allow the panelists first to start with Anita Mitic to introduce herself, then to Jagan and Dismas.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this panel. I am thrilled that World Movement for Democracy and the Hurford Fellowship is having someone to work on transitional justice. I think this is a very important topic, especially for young people. My name is Anita Mitic. I was also a Hurford Youth Fellow back in 2013. I worked on democracy and the participation of young people in the democratization process. Currently, I'm finishing my master's studies in United States, so I'm not in Serbia at this moment, but I will be there back very soon. I had almost a decade-long career working in transitional justice, human rights, and reconciliation in the Western Balkans. As a director of Youth Initiative for Human Rights for several years. I think we did a lot on bringing activism into the process of transitional justice and trying to hold the war criminals accountable. There is a lot of the things that we can learn from Serbia and from the Western Balkan region, and I'm looking forward to talk about this with you today.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you, Anita. I will move to Jagan Johnson to introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be invited to this discussion. My name is Jagan Johnson. I'm a Gambian, but I'm based in South Africa, Johannesburg, and I work with the Open Society Foundation's Africa Regional Office. And yeah, looking forward to learning and also sharing ideas with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Jagan. And Dismas Nkunda from Uganda.
Thank you, Marr. Yes, my name is Dismas Nkunda, and rightly so, Jagan says I'm from Uganda, but I closely monitor what is happening in Burundi, and hence Jagan is asking me to take part into this conversation. I'm Dismas Nkunda. I am the founder and executive director of Atrocities Watch Africa, and I have held different positions. So I won't go into that. It's quite long, but I happen to have been one of the people who wrote the Africa Union Transitional Justice Policy. And therefore, there's a few things I might know that would enhance and make this conversation better, maybe, I don't know.
Thank you, Dismas. So my first question will go to Anita. Anita, given your background working with civil society in the Balkans and also mobilizing signatures to establish a Transitional Justice Commission, what is the motivation behind this, and why do you believe young people, why do you think this is important for the youth in the Balkans? And how receptive was the government in responding to this call?
Well, I'm thinking how to answer this question because generally there is a very little knowledge about what happened during the 90s in Serbia, and especially among young people. We have a huge problem with that, and it's very difficult to motivate people to participate for some cause if they have no information about it, because Serbia is the country of the state of denial of its role in the war during the 90s. It was three actually wars. One of them ended up in genocide. There is a lot of history there. There is a lot of bad things that happened, and young people are not interested, first of all, because it's not, government doesn't do anything to teach young people, and all the information they receive, it's from some right-wing organization or media outlets that are not very well explanatory of what happened, or they're just getting information from the government, which is also very bad since they are also deniers. So that is I think the most difficult part. So we would have like people coming into the office while I was working there, human rights activists, and they will be really surprised when they would go through some kind of non-formal educational program about, the war, about what happened, because they wouldn't know. Some of them would, receive the information well, some of them wouldn't. But, I think that people should that first right on information to discuss, to at least have information to form their opinions, if nothing else. So I think that's like the first problem. The second problem for us comes from that we are still ruled by very nationalistic political elites that are gaining their cheapest political points on spreading the hate, and they thrive in that kind of environment. And of course, young people are not, any different from they cannot have different growth from the state itself. So the rarer examples who are interested enough to join the cause, and then brave enough to join it on the side of transitional justice and protection of human rights, because those are really not easy things to do in Serbia. I would say that I always perceived young people as kind of a gatekeepers of this better future, in the sense of that young people, because youth allows you some form of idealism, it allows you some form of activism, it allows you this belief and willingness to work on things. And I think those are necessary adjectives to have if you want to change the world or your country. And I always imagine that between greater future for the Balkans and youth, there are these doors that they should open, and those doors are definitely the doors of the transitional justice, reconciliation, and accepting the facts of what happened during the 90s. Without opening those doors, I'm afraid that the path is not there for brighter future, because I don't believe in creating relationships among young people or societies that were devastated by war by ignoring that. I think that we cannot take it out of the personal histories of people and families that something bad happened, and without that recognition to the victims, to the families, and to everything that happened, I think that we cannot proceed into this better world, if that something like that exists at all. So yeah, I see the role of young people in that process as probably the most crucial one. Another reason why I see it is that because, of course, as every big challenge for the world and for the countries, it requires support of the young people. But it is the world for them. And saddening it is that in Serbia, in many cases, we will have young people who are even more conservative or more hateful towards their neighbors than their parents who were supporters or participants in the war. So the future doesn't seem that bright, but it does. I think it does give some hope when I see, these pockets of resistance, and that no matter how hard things are, there are still some people who are willing to participate.
Thank you, Anita. And that question actually takes me to Dismas Nkunda from Uganda, having a lot of experience with that of Uganda, Burundi. For the past 15 years, Dismas, the civil society organization oppositions in Burundi have been eliminated by the ruling party, and some young people got to organize themselves in a youth thing called Mboro Rekure, if I pronounce it rightly, which means those who see from afar. And this group of people have been killing and torturing, those that are anti-government. So they are more or less a youth wing for the ruling party in that of the government. But then since Everest took in assumed office last year, is there hope for an open space in open civic space to advocate for accountability in preventing another dictator in Burundi? Or has there been any accountability for these young people that are in this Mbono Rekure group? Dismas, I think you are on mute.
Yes, sorry about that. Yeah, I'm saying that's a good question. Let me try to see if I can labor to answer the question. Yes, there are two types of youth in Burundi. There is the victims and there is the perpetrators. So the perpetrators, first of all, is that group that you're talking about, the Imbonerakure, who number close to about 50. I did a report for the UN about the group, and I discovered their chain link, their history, how they are armed, their command structure. So you find that they are intimately very related to the ruling party that is the CNNDD. And therefore, they take some of their commands from the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Internal Affairs. Now, they range between the age of 15 and 35. And if you talk about any commission of atrocities that have happened in Burundi, Imbonerakure rank the highest. Now, there is also another group, which has suffered the opposite, which have been the victims of the Imbonerakure, and these are the youth who were forced to leave the country and they went into refugee camps, either in Tanzania, in Uganda, or in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and in some other cases into Rwanda. Now, these ones, when you speak to them, they will tell you that the question of whether there is a reconciliation, each one have a different take when they come from these two perspectives. A perpetrator will say that what they are doing, they will justify their actions. The victim will say that the actions of the perpetrator must be punished. That's why you find that, for example, in Burundi, there has been consecutive attempts to have peace and reconciliation in that country, but neither of them has been able to materialize because they are divided opinions. Burundi is a country that is divided ethnically. It has 3 ethnic groups, and therefore the contestation between whether the truth, it depends on who is saying it. Is it the ruling party? Is it the opposition? Is it the Hutu? Is it the Tutsi? Is it the Twa? Who is the person who is saying the truth? So that contestation has left a market situation that doesn't give a person the hope that one would need in order to have a meaningful transitional justice. So a few youth that I spoke to when I was doing that report, they were asking me, okay, the ones who are in refugee camps, they were asking me, if we have a truth and reconciliation, if we have a commission of which wants to do truth and reconciliation, what kind of commission is it? Is it independent? Who chooses it? Is it the president? Is it the government? Then they will ask, is it impartial? Is it going to be impartial to a particular ethnic group or to a range of saying, these are youth, these are older people, these are women, these are girls? How impartial is it going to be? And then is it safe? In other words, can it be able to do certain things that ordinarily would shame the government and the government wouldn't be able to react? So the long and the easy question to answer you, my brother, I didn't even greet you. Negative.
Okay.
Okay, so yes, they constitute, the other part of it is that they constitute the biggest part of the population in Burundi. Almost about 70% of the population is about the youth. And these are the ones who are in dire poverty. Unfortunately, they are the ones also who communicate most. I held a meeting of Burundian youth in Uganda a couple of years ago in 2016. And it was incredible the amount of energy they have, the amount of communication they would do. In other words, they understand the processes. They are in the social media era. They understand exactly everything as it's happening, but they have been limited by the processes which don't give them the access to be able to independently and freely give out their views, which is the essence of what a transparent justice and accountability mechanism would look like. Does that give an answer, or you have another follow-up?
The other follow-up question will be, since President Everest came into power last year, has there been accountability for these young people that are part of this Nkunda group?
Okay, yeah, that's the other part. Now, when the president came to power, and Meghan can jump in because we have had a discussion about this as open society, is that he did make some promises that he's shifting from the baggage of President Nkurunziza, and that he's going to make it much more easy for the country. But it's almost there, and nothing has changed, nothing has happened. Everything, he has carried on the same legacy of President Nkurunziza. They have not accepted the return of civil society organizations which were banished out of the country. The Imbonerakure are still doing the same things that they were doing in the past. I remember when at his swearing in, he said that he made a good statement, which we thought that we are going to hold him accountable to. He said that all those who commit crimes, whether in government members or any other dignitaries, must be brought before a competent jurisdiction. That he said on his inauguration, but as to whether that one has come to fruition, no, nothing. I think the same system has continued. The exiled NGOs, the civil society space, Burundi currently has the biggest number of civil society actors that are exiled outside of its country. And these are the people who constitute the biggest number that would help the youth to realize certain forms of justice that they have been yearning for all this long time. So unfortunately, the answer is Everest coming into power, nothing has changed.
Well, that is unfortunate because Burundi has been seen as one of the countries that will be that, that will help towards making sure that all the atrocities that have happened in the past 15 years, Everest will have actually come up with a strategic TJ process to ensure that what has happened before, there's accountability, and also it's an opportunity for them to actually strengthen their democracy. And that takes me to Meghan. You have rich knowledge in transitional justice across Africa and that of South Africa. But in the Gambia, we have seen how selective the government could be when they establish a commission to look at past human rights violations or economic violations. But in implementing of those recommendations, they just look at those that are anti their party, and those that are within them, they actually did not do nothing about that. So what does this mean to civil society across Africa and around the world in terms of how selective transitional justice government could be in implementing recommendations?
Thanks, Marr. Wow, that's it's a good question, but it's a whole debate. But I think I'll attempt to answer very quickly, maybe across the board. Issues of transitional justice, especially within the context of truth and reconciliation, are inherently extremely political. We've seen that in South Africa, whereby, it was a TRC, yes, thousands of people, came and they testified, overall. We also saw that, overall it was 2,000 people that had testified. It went on, from 1996 for very many years. Perpetrators, victims, and others told their stories, etc. But again, the feeling is that it was incomplete and a great deal of dissatisfaction, largely because of the perceived arbitrary nature, the lack of implementation of the recommendations, and also what is being perceived as impunity reigning supreme, because there were very few people that were brought to book. And obviously, this came also at the back of a unusually TRCs, Truth and Reconciliation Commissions specifically, but broadly speaking, transitional justice agendas are usually couched within a period of transition, right? Where the country is going through a seismic shift or a change has happened, something that is monumental, which requires, a straddling of a balance of a very thin line to make sure that obviously the people that bear the largest brunt of responsibilities of rights abuses are brought to book. But at the same time, you often also see, depending, that the situation becomes extremely complicated. Complicated in the sense that you'll have some instances where, in Gambia's case, for instance, the perpetrators became victims. And victims became perpetrators. So what do you do with that in that particular instance? But certainly, I think the issues of selectivity, again, it becomes difficult because and we're going through the process now in Gambia, whereby just today, the lead counsel informed the TRRC that they're looking at extending not the timetable, but they're extending into going into various geographical locations where these human rights abuses took place, because there's certain victims that felt completely left out. Their stories weren't told, their voices were not heard. That is an injustice in itself. But then the reality is, again, just going further very quickly, in the case of Gambia, I'm also very worried in the sense that despite the fact that the TRRC has now extended the mandate, this is the second time that it's doing it. It should have finished on the 18th of October 2020. Realistically, obviously now they've gone ahead until the end of June. And I'm worried precisely with this question that you have asked. The chances of selective justice and whitewashing the report and cherry picking and looking at issues of favoritism based on political expediency becomes especially more real in the Gambia's case for two reasons. Number one, we are going into an elections period when the report is coming out. That is likely to take precedence and priority over this particular report, let alone the issues of releasing it and the implementation aspects of it. And then the final point I wanted to make also is that these transitional justice arrangements, it's inherently a national issue, but I think we have seen in some instances, in this case for Gambia, it is not only a national issue. And I think there's an added advantage here for us because it transcends beyond the borders of Gambia. If you look at the 58 migrants, the case, the murders of the 48 Ghanaians and in total 58 West African migrants, has internationalized, at least if not that, has regionalized the issue, whereby other countries, other than Gambia alone, but Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Senegal, Nigeria, Burkina, you name it, have got victims that were also involved in this whole rights abuses that have happened. And then the second issue that a lot of us tend to forget is the internationalized aspects of it is Yahya Jammeh, because he is the lead perpetrator who has now taken refuge in Equatorial Guinea. And there has to be massive diplomatic maneuverings to be able to basically, at the end of the day, get some degree or semblance of justice moving forward. I'll stop there for now. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you, Jagan, for that. That becomes a challenge when civil society and young people are looking forward towards ensuring that the democracy actually continues and what actually happened. There is accountability for all, but not only selected people. Which moves me to the issue of reconciliation to Anita from Serbia. In 2016, the 6 Western Balkans prime ministers signed the establishment of the Regional Youth Cooperation, which is called RICO, to promote the spirit of reconciliation in Balkans. Anita, I just wanted to ask you, what will this mean to the young people in Balkans after a dark period of war and ethnic cleansing in the 1990s?
Well, it's been 5 years since that office is established. I personally think it's a success that office still exists because in 5 years the things really got pretty complicated and a lot of things happened in the Balkans, including pandemic, which kind of limited the way you can you can take people across the borders physically to, you know, for people to pass the borders. So I think that the mere fact that that office still exists is a good thing. I think it will need so much time to pass for that office to kind of make a change. But I was one of the people who participated in the process of establishing that office, and we actually, as a youth initiative, while we were working, we even before there was a government initiative for establishing that office, the organization was advocating for this kind of institution that will provide this kind of a space for young people to have to meet their peers. Because we targeted as one of the main problems of the Balkans that young people do not have opportunities to meet after the war. Their parents, you know, they do know each other. They lived in the same country. After that country fell apart, these people completely lost any kind of connections. And we came from the opinion that, the only thing that is worse from your enemy is probably, not knowing someone and being afraid of that, unknown. So that was the logic behind creating this space for young people to meet. And, there was a lot of discussion about the mandate and should reconciliation be part of this. And I thought that, reconciliation, of course, will follow the meeting of, and building this relationship across the borders in the Western Balkans. And then there was a question, should it be a transitional justice tool? And I also thought that it's implied that it's a transitional justice tool because, if you take a person to Sarajevo, which is capital of Bosnia, which was held under the siege for 4 years by Serbian forces, you cannot not see the consequences of that war in Sarajevo because, buildings are still, having parts of the war and the bombs that fell, and people still talk about it. It's still very important. So it is basically impossible that you go to Sarajevo and not ask these questions. So I think that the art would be how to moderate those discussions among young people on these really, really difficult conversations. And this is why we needed this office. So not only to, bring young people together, but also to have this kind of experts who will be able and who will know how to moderate the discussion, which I think is one of the most difficult jobs because it requires not only knowledge, but it requires certain level of empathy, certain level of understanding the positions and different stories. And as you can imagine, Balkan is a very complicated region of the world, as probably as everyone thinks that they're unique for that matter. But so the value of this office is in that it is still the only regional institution made by the governments that has some kind of reconciliation or in their mandate. Is it enough? Of course not. Can we have young people meeting each other and building this relationship without that coming from without changing the narrative, and that narrative coming from politicians and governments? I mean, of course, it's almost impossible. That it's even unfair to expect from young people to hold that kind of a burden and to leave that kind of burden on them to do the work. So of course we need that incentive. We need a commission that will establish what happened, that will establish the facts. We need we need history books that will explain these things. We need generations of teachers and professors in academia, in high schools, to be capable to talk about this, and not to be, and all of this knowledge that needs to be created now, that shouldn't be, just personal interpretation of history, but some kind of official history, or at least different perspectives on those events. At least if we cannot agree on what happened, at least we can, agree on that happened and then have different perspectives. So of course, there is a lot of things to be done. I have to admit that in 2016, I was much more optimistic when I thought that, that office will have a power and to change our world. Certainly did change our lives in the sense of this great success that that was achieved by civil society organizations in the Western Balkans. But as I said, I think that after 5 years, we can say that it's almost unfair to expect that kind of change to come from just one institution, regardless of that how extraordinary that institution is.
Thank you, Anita. I couldn't agree more with you, because I think in transitional justice, if the truth is not told, it will be hard for reconciliation to happen. And in the absence of truth and accountability, people will still find it difficult to get together and then move forward with life. And that actually retards the advancement of TJ process. And I would like to ask you, Dismas, regarding that, the TR, the Truth Reconciliation Commission. I know in Burundi, there was one that was established in 2014, looking at between 1962 and that of 2008. But for some reason, the former regime pushed it back to 1885 to look at the colonial past and change the mandate of that of the commission. And it has been believed that this commission is not neutral and that of independent. Why will such move be taken by a government instead of looking at what happened during that period, but going back to colonial eras, knowing fully well that there will be less accountability for what has happened in 1885, almost 100 years, more than 100 years ago?
Thank you, Mal.
Prove that.
Yes. I mean, because of the violence, the nature of the violence that happened in Burundi, the violence in that country has been going on pretty much ever since it became a country. So there has been, because of the violence, there has been a tendency of creating commissions, various commissions that are aimed at bringing about reconciliation. But moments when they are created, some of them are overtaken by political events, indicating to you that actually even those commissions are themselves politically motivated. In other words, they have to conform to the political processes that are happening in that country. After 1993, when there was the killing of the first elected Hutu president, Nkunda Daye, the UN set up a transitional justice system in Burundi, which had 5 members on the committee. And this one, when it started, it was overtaken by events, because the political processes in Burundi changed when the Arusha Accord came into place. So in 2014, what they decided was that in order for them to do any accountability, there has been a series of genocides, massacres happening in the history of that country. So they thought that by going as far back as in 1885, they would be able to address injustices that were caused by the Belgians who were the colonial rulers, and the Germans who partly had been in charge of Burundi before the Belgians came. So that was their hope. So they had a transitional justice mechanism. They elected 11 individuals as commissioners. Individuals, they're given a very good mandate, extremely very good mandate, to look at to injustices that have been committed. They wanted to look at questions of how they can stop human rights violations. They wanted to investigate crimes that were committed in the past. They wanted to see if they can identify those ones who are responsible and what form of punishment they would be able to give them. And unfortunately, that too has now been overtaken by events, because as you can tell, is that commission which was set up post the Arusha Accord and even the one of 2014, all of them were political in nature, because the composition of the commissioners, the manner in which they carried out their mandate, their financing, the reach in the number of people they had to be able to reach in order for them to get their conclusions, all the parenthera of things that were supposed to be aimed at bringing about peace, reconciliation, and justice, they all failed simply because there is no political will. I hate that word, political will, but there's not any other word that I can use, because political will has been overused and misused for other reasons. So for me, for the case of Burundi, everybody tells you that we want peace and reconciliation, but in what form is it supposed to come? Who is supposed to initiate that process? If the government comes into power, 2 weeks later, it promises that we are going to have accountability and no one can be in end of impunity. We are not going to allow people to commit crimes and they go about it. But you still are maintaining the individuals who have been committing those crimes in offices of power, individuals who can still commit, who are sanctioned by the UN for committing crimes, and then you maintain them in your government. It just gives a wrong signal to the youth, a wrong signal to the women, a wrong signal to the victims, and everybody just falls back and say, it's the same story. We are still, we are still victims. We are still on our own. There's no one who's caring for us. So precisely, Marr, that's the story. The story was that the Burundi government wanted to go as far as in 1885 so that they could get perpetrators, the colonialists who had ruled Burundi, and this is not said that they didn't commit crimes, they did. But what form of accountability would you get from them? What kind of punishment would you get from them? How many 60 years plus over? I don't know. I think it was an excuse for them to be able to fail that commission, and they have successfully done that.
Thank you, Dismas, for that. I think that when politics actually goes into transitional justice, always affects the independence of commissions and that of institutions that have been established to take lead in making sure there is the truth is told and then also accountability, but most importantly, giving redress to the victims that needed it the most. Jagan, I know in South Africa, there has been a level of success that has been registered in their truth-seeking process and in the transitional justice process at large. And as a result of that, as a result of the truth being told in the past, as a result of accountability being established in the past, the South African democracy has been advancing beyond all odds compared to some African countries. What is it that we need to learn, or what is it that young people need to learn from this South African experience so that they can actually replicate such or improve such in their respective countries?
I think two things. Let me just start off with the fact that South Africans and young people were central to South Africa's emancipation, and as a result, they invariably bore the brunt of hostilities in the instruments of repression during apartheid. That is one. As I said, during the Truth and Reconciliation hearings, it was documented that the rights abuses perpetrated against children and young people were largely between the ages of 13 and 24. That's very young. That is obviously not surprising, because it was children and young people who were directly engaged in the resistance and the struggle against the apartheid government. And many in instance played a catalytic role in these struggles, from as far back as the 1976 school protests, the Soweto riots, so to speak, Hector Peterson and others, and also the radicalization of, I wouldn't say radical age, but the emergence of Black power and Black consciousness in the 1980s. I mean, all these were young people that were at the forefront of it. So it stands to reason that they'd also be the victims or the forefront of the rights abuses. But I think the fact remains that, as I said, as far as and these people have obviously now grown up, they're no longer children, they're at the forefront of it. But the interesting thing is that the culture of resistance and organizing, I think that is something that a lot of African countries could learn. And this is largely couched between three different, elements that are absolutely pivotal for the effectiveness and the efficiency of non-state actors to basically, one, continue to put pressure on government to ensure that justice is done, and most importantly, to continue to ensure that they continue to bring up injustices where they occur. And these three elements that I think we could learn from civil society in South Africa is resilience. They've been extremely focused. The TRRC, as I said, with all its gains, have had major flaws, to a point where to this day, just last year, there's still court cases that are coming up against perpetrators that had killed loved ones. And it's really civil society that's been driving this and putting pressure. As Dismas has said, again, we can be victims of political expediencies. When things change and the priorities shift a little bit here and there, it becomes a problem. So civil society has been resilient in making sure that we keep our eye on the ball, not only of past atrocities and the report within the TRRC itself, but the emerging issues that have come out of the unaddressed or unattended issues, right? So the issues of social justice becomes a problem. You're seeing the fees must fall, issues of public service delivery. You saw what happened in Marikana and the massacre. These rights abuses, again, part is a legacy of apartheid, which should have been addressed by the TRC, but they didn't. And as a result, what we are beginning to see is not only a recurrence, but a continuation. So civil society has been very, very instrumental in being resilient on this. The second thing is the focus. They've been extremely focused, on different elements. But I think on the whole, you'll see that civil society, South African civil society, is extremely powerful in holding governments to account. Not only government, that's the other thing we need to learn, because government does not, in some instances, if they've been complicit in rights abuses, they are not complicit alone. If you're looking at corporate crimes, if you're looking at collusion with big mining companies and whatever, I mean, these things are happening and they continue to happen, whereby communities are being marginalized, injustices being perpetrated at the very, very top echelons of government, at the behest and also the prodding of big corporate business. So they've been extremely focused around bringing some of these things to the fore. And then finally is the independence of thought and the will. You'll get to see that it is not enough just to be able to put pressure on government to go out to the streets or whatever that young people also do, to also use social media to basically voice voices, to mobilize, to convene as a platform or whatever else. But it's also important to drill down on the evidence-based aspects of it, to generate knowledge, to understand the problem, to be able to diagnose, analyze, put forward recommendations, and also ventilate, as well as disseminate that information. So I think on those three elements, there's a lot to be learned from South Africa's civil society, especially with the young people. I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jagan, for that. Anita, I would ask you the last question regarding the unrest that actually happened in March 12, 2003, when Prime Minister Zoran Zindic was assassinated, and his election was actually brought high hopes in the Balkans that, or in Serbia, that democracy will actually prevail, and then there will be accountability after he has been elected. What does that killing mean for not only Serbia, but that of the Balkans, for those that we are running for accountability, knowing fully well that he was going to come from it?
Well, I think that it spoke loudly that I haven't got a question about Zoran Djindjic for years now from anyone. So thank you for asking that question. I think that, Serbia, that was a prime example in Serbia that with democratic revolution, if there is no systematic change and institutional change, it's very difficult for things to change themselves. So, democracy on the paper, just as an election system is important, but it's not everything. It's far from everything. Of course, the person who shot that fire, he was assassinated, but there was never trial on the political motivations why he was murdered, and we today know, I mean, that he was actually murdered in the campaign against sending the war generals into the International Court for former Yugoslavia. And this just shows how how criminal and how strong those war connections and those war institution and that that kind the war power that is behind the government and behind and is incorporating a lot of people, how strong and difficult it is to get out of that, and breaking those institutions would will take time, but it also requires so much light on the opposite side, and that is a darkness. It requires at least the same amount of life and light to fight it. Unfortunately, I think that the prime minister had that kind of power in him, but unfortunately that bullet was stronger.
Thank you, Anita, for that. For the participants, if you have any questions for Anita, Jagan, or Dismas, please, you can briefly ask the question and address it to the one that you are asking for, so we can wrap up in the next 13 minutes. So you can raise your hand and you will be on mute to ask. So in a situation where we are yet to have a question, I will throw this back to Dismas regarding the case in Burundi, because we know the new president actually is served more or less like a colleague of the former president, and there is high likely that the trend will actually continue. The way and manner that they govern the country will continue. The civil society wouldn't have the space in order to be able to hold the government accountable, and that will actually get the country back to the drawing board, and there will not be much effort, right, that will be realized in order to sustain the democracy after 15 years of autocracy. So what is your comment on that, or your analysis on that?
Thank you, Marr, and thank you, everybody. The Burundi is it's not any different from any other country. It's not any different from Gambia. It's neither any different from Uganda. It's a proper African country that exhibits all the wrongs that you can always think about. Now, when President Nkunda in 2015 decided that he was going to stand for another term, I guess that is where the panacea of all the problems that are currently the country is having right now. Jagan and I and Open Society, we had a session on which we are discussing the new president and what it meant that he has come to power. And we made the realization that when he came in, he seemed as though he was going to work towards the past, because he had a different character. Initially, President Nkurunziza, the one who died, he didn't actually want Evariste to become the president. He wanted another gentleman. He's now the Speaker of Parliament, Nyabenda. He wanted Nyabenda to become the president, the one to replace him when he decided not to stand for power. So Ndayishimiye Evariste, who eventually became the president, had been viewed by many as being a moderate. As a moderate, he was seen as a person who was incorruptible. He was a charming guy, quite very, people accepted and said that this is the kind of guy that we're going to have. But interestingly, the day he swore in, he became a true African leader. He started on the same note of saying that we will not tolerate any opposition. No opposition in this country will be tolerated. Then he went on to say that we had hoped that he would open up for civil society organizations that had fled into exile and returning of refugees. Now, some refugees returned, but majority of them are still outside the country, because the refugees are people who can tell whether there is any change in the policies that force them to leave the particular country. There is no group of people that can get information or be informed about their country than refugees. They keep a tab on what exactly is happening. So we still have Burundian refugees in all the countries, in Rwanda, in Uganda, in Tanzania. The ones in Tanzania have been forced, which is against the UN, have been forced to go back. So yes, we had hope in Evariste coming into power, but unfortunately he has gone back to the ruling party, CNDD, which is a party that we know that has committed crimes right, left, and center, and whether there's any hope that anything positive is going to happen, I am equally hopeless.
Thank you, Dismas. I have two other questions, one from Meghan and one from Stephanie from North Macedonia. I think the first question, I will give it to Anita, given your background as someone else who has been working with young people mobilizing signatures to establish a truth commission in Serbia and in the Balkans. So the question from Meghan is, she would like to know how can we see young people working together moving forward in transitional justice?
Well, I can see them very clearly, but I'm afraid that that's not reality for many institutions and governments in the world. I think that we need kind of coordinated big movement that is only dealing with transitional justice, and that will kind of create this, norms that of, where it will be shameful to be a denier, where it will be shameful to, not to participate or not to admit what happened. We kind of, I think that the whole country needs, or countries need to stand behind that, and to like that kind of changes the whole society. It will require the change of whole society and state, etc. So definitely, I mean, we did see those kind of processes. They were, and we know that they're possible. It is just a matter of, as I like to say, a perfect storm to happen. I think that we need to help young people as much as possible to kind of resist the nationalistic and right-wing narratives. I think that will be the challenge of our generation, or this next years, and that will not be a very easy job, because there is a lot of people, a lot of governments around the world that are that need a whole generation of young people that will be manipulated, and that because those are the easiest to be used in destructive forces. So in that sense, we definitely need, as I said, the light, but we need something to kind of move and bring young people into the discussion of transitional justice. And I'm certain that there is a lot of people that are doing that around the world, and maybe this is a good beginning, at least for different backgrounds to kind of share their stories, and maybe that can move forward.
Thank you, Anita, for that. The last question I will take it to Jagan. Jagan, I know you've been writing a lot of articles, blogs, and you've been, should I say, stubborn on the Gambia government, taking them to court and winning cases against them. This question from Stephanie has to do with the issue of education. This question has to do with the issue of education, and it reads from Stephanie. What role does the educational system currently playing in the transitional justice process? Do you think that it is enough, and how can we secure that our generations are learning the right values?
Yeah, I think to my knowledge, I'm not aware that there is a strategy in place to couch this through the education system. And I assume if that's going to happen, it will be part of civic education and rights education. But I think it's an opportunity for that to happen. One is to register, the past as a historical document. Secondly, also is to, again, encourage a younger generation, as we like to say in Gambia, never again, to ensure that we don't repeat the same mistakes that we did. But I think also, thirdly, more importantly, is the fact that we can look at, internalizing, as cathartic as it sounds, a situation where all semblance of good democratic practice and government institutions have been whittled down, A, B, C, D, and E. This is what you get at the end of the day. So maybe if couched within the aspects of civic education and human rights that could work. I think also what it could also possibly do is to ensure that we don't have a revisionist agenda, because that is very likely in Gambia, in the sense that we may have a change of government. Things are very fluid. If you have the pro-APRC, which was the party of Yahya Jammeh before, for example, winning power, there will be a revisionist narrative for sure that will be able to, that will be plagued into the public domain, and that doesn't augur well for the society in general, but also more importantly for the victims, because they're going to be victimized again. And so as a result, I think this is something that that needs to be looked at. I think it is something that is important. I think it's something that is innovative. And finally, the other thing that it could possibly do is to perhaps be one of the avenues towards reconciliation. And I think, you know, reconciliation has got very many different aspects. You can't force people to reconcile if they don't collectively accept that justice has taken place. But I think it's an avenue for that. I'll stop there for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Jagan. Patricia, we will take the last question from you if you can make it as brief as possible, since we have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Marr. Thank you, everyone, for this great discussion. I would like to just know a little about where do the young politicians stand in transnational justice, and if are you considering political parties as important in this process? Because, for example, in my political party here in Brazil, we use compliance to have democratic solutions and for share with everyone why you decide something. So I would like to hear a little about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Among the panelists who would like to answer Patricia's questions on the role of political parties. Patricia is a young politician in Brazil, and she is pursuing, she has run for 2 different offices, both the city council and then that of the legislative arm of government, if I'm right. So if anyone is willing to take that questions, I believe Jagan or Anita Dismas, do you want to say anything about that?
I can try quickly. I think in the case of the Gambia, certainly it's a tricky situation. Why? Because the political opposition, especially the largest political opposition, were actually victims of the abuse and abuse of political rights, etc. And I'll give you a quick example. 31 of the executive of the UDP were rounded up, incarcerated. 1 of them was killed. Tons of them were raped, tortured, etc., which actually ironically triggered the change that we are seeing now, without going into detail. That's just the irony. Now, the interesting thing is within this context is that I was involved in a case to support the UDP 31, and we took the case to the ECOWAS court. The UDP 31 won that case. Now, when we took the case to the ECOWAS court, remember, the political party in question were in opposition. When the ruling happened, the political party now were in power. So the reality was that for the political party that were the victims to ensure that there is compliance with the court order. And in this case, we can say to ensure that compliance is met by the government when it comes to reparations, when it comes to looking at the recommendations, when it comes to dispensing justice. And we can look at it in the form of the court case. We all of a sudden saw that the level of interest had completely been withdrawn, despite the fact that it was their membership that stood to gain the most through compensation and other things like that. We had to push and fight with the same political party that we're in alignment with, that took the matter to the ECOWAS court to say that you have to do the right thing. So it is very interesting to see that you can actually have political parties, especially in opposition, abdicate their responsibility based on political expediency. And that's a direct experience that we have had. But just to say two things very, very quickly. I think that political party opposition especially have a moral responsibility and a right to hold government to account, to ensure that in the cases of TRRC reports or whatever, that justice is not only seen to be done, that it is done, that they abide by the letter and the spirit of the recommendations of these TRRCs, because they're also a voice of reason. They're also a moral voice that can amplify and also help to give respite to victims in the long run. I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jagan. Thank you, Anita Mitic from Serbia for swiftly making this, and then that of Dismas Nkunda and Jagan Gray Johnson. Thank you for all that have been asking and participating in this call. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.